online for a while. Hopefully we'll be able to stick all of the material. So I'll rush through with the preface of what the hell is going on. And let me stop sharing our patrons and wait for our little picture to adjust. Come on. Is it not in? Okay. Hold them. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yikes. Anyway, Jeanson is continuing to compress material. And he talks about a new haplogroup C that shows a break from Central Asia, which Jeanson decides to ram down to AD 1000 based on some tribes in Canada. That he puts in a little footnote because he says data not shown. I'm basing these conclusions on the branching patterns on those reported for a Chipewyan individual in Pinotti et al. 2019, figure 2. I converted the dates via methods similar to the ones I used in the supplemental online tables, which is a fancy way of saying he takes the regular genetic data and goes to squish it down. But how plausible is this 1000 AD migration from Asia into Canada based on the Pinotti paper? Well, gosh, what was in the Pinotti paper? Well, I'll be putting a link up to it, and you'll be able to check that out. That's actually at the far end of the C group in the paper in question, and they were dating it in the Pinotti paper to originating around 15.6 thousand years ago, which is a pretty good, fun little spread for it. And of course, the idea that there were archaeological indications and all that for people that have been in the area using perfectly standard radiometric dating, which of course he's not going to pay attention to, or if he does, he's just going to arbitrarily scrunch them down according to his proprietary charts. Part 2 relates to Jonathan Sarfati piece that was from 2014, but CMI decided to trot it out last month, which is about shrimps and how they pack a powerful superpower punch, which is all gee whiz material on how mantis shrimps have very fast movements, and they have wonderful color vision. And he riffs off a couple papers, all of which by now are completely accessible. There's one from 2001 on tunable color vision in a mantis shrimp, and Patek 2005 on the cavitation effects of their rapid movements and so forth and so on. Now, 2014, of course, is not 2023. And so you'd think that maybe the science had moved on in that time. Yeah, including stuff that was already on the table regarding mantis shrimps that don't show up on Sarfati's scope and therefore don't connect up. A 2014 paper by Thone indicated that those mantis eyes actually weren't quite as complicated as had originally been thought. And they went into the details about how they developed a slightly different modality of processing visual information from what occurs in, for example, vertebrates. And there's a nice commentary piece on this in Nature that I'll also be putting a link up to. And Patek, of the 2005 paper that Sarfati riffed off of, was on the team of Steinhardt 2021 at PNAS, which used the mantis shrimp specifically as a starting point for working out the bigger principles of how animals can have ultra-fast reactions generally. In other words, what are the common biological elements and what are the genetic factors and so forth and so on. So it reminds us yet again how creationism plays gee whiz with a relatively limited data field, and the real scientists just keep on plugging away, often involving years and years and years of hard work, as opposed to the punditry that happens at CMI. Of course, there are also some fossils. We can't miss fossils, can we? Even though Sarfati didn't seem to notice any of them. A 2010 paper by Haug on some from the Mesozoic, and This had implications for clarifying their phylogeny, showing the gradual evolution of features and that. And then that work was built on by Koga and Rouse in 2021, which I put in the link as well. All of this before, dating prior to CMI reposting Sarfati's decade-old piece. This is just almost invariably that if you read a creationist piece, particularly a gee whiz one, and the older it is, the more the odds are that if you research what the topic is, you're going to find out lots and lots of stuff which is not being mentioned by the creationist, and which also makes an awful lot of sense and explores and expands the area. It's just, you learn stuff. So I've got all that out of the way, and I'll be sticking all those cute little links up in the master work. A sidebar that I'm going to be having a reference to, not a link, however, because I had to download this one, but dear you, Ross, I got a little message through one of the little networks that they are offering free PDF from a little precis of Noah's flood, which is kind of a tidied up version of one of his recent books, Interpreting Genesis, which I have not bought. But anyway, this is particularly on Noah's flood. And of course, since Noah's flood is being discussed in Rocks Were There, Volume 2 in great detail, and the various legends about it, I was kind of curious to see what old Earth creationists had on the point. And I hadn't realized just how far out on the limb good old Ross was pushing. But basically what they're arguing is there was a universal flood that didn't cover the entire Earth. It was that somehow or other, all the human beings lived in a specialized area, the details of which Ross certainly doesn't tell in this. Maybe a map would have been of help in this 11-page pamphlet. Sorry about that. And that a flood of unspecified character came along and destroyed everybody in that little zone. And that was all of humanity. And of course, all these soulish animals that were associated with human beings at that time. Well, you know, we've got people in Africa and we've got people in Asia and so forth. When did this happen? We've got people arriving in Australia 40, 50, 60,000 years ago. When exactly was this? Well, according to the ballpark bit, Ross thinks the flood took place 50,000 years ago, plus or minus 40,000 years, which is a just hellaciously wide margin. So he's not really telling us where it's happening, except it's wherever Noah is. And he's very vague on the dates, and he kind of flips off the issue that there's archaeological data that human beings are living in lots and lots of places on the planet by any time frame that he's dealing with. And how many animals are on the ark again? You know, or he even suggests that the ark was kind of being built so big to impress how important this issue was that the people around Noah repent. Maybe was he thinking that there were remarkably few animals that might be plausible to put on the ark if they're talking about the critters living right around that area where the universal flood was about to happen. This is kind of the opposite stretch of the literalism that you find in the Ark encounter. And it will certainly be kept in mind that 50 or rather 90,000 to 10,000 year date range when we're dealing with the chronology of actual human evolution for the human evolution chapter in Rocks Were There, Volume 2. So that's going to be quite fascinating. Part of me is curious to see, does he go into more detail in anything in the book that he's alluding to? The Genesis thing. Let's see what it's not. The Navigating Genesis, A Scientist's Journey Through Genesis 1 to 11 by U. Ross. But I've had enough experience with Ross's apologetics going back decades with his earlier books, is that yeah, not really. That you don't really get more detail. You just get kind of daisy chains of Ross reminding you what Ross believes, citing another work that tells you what Ross believes. And you would have thought they could have skipped some of the digressions on scripture in this little pamphlet and put in like a little map of where they thought human beings were and a little list of how many kinds were aboard. the ark, what kind of animals were involved, and then some clue as to how the population of all human beings could be generated after that alleged bottleneck, and whether anybody in the genetic community finds that plausible, any more plausible than Nathaniel Jeanson's truncated version. So it's kind of like Jeanson light. It would appear that there's a dogma there. There's got to be a flood. In fact, quite a lot of the references in this little pamphlet are these talking about what Peter and Paul and Matthew and Luke and all that are writing about this stuff in the New Testament, as if that's not just more fan fiction bearing on the point at issue. And he brings up Nephilim. And so he's racking his brain over whether or not there were any Nephilim that survived or not. And I'll have to read this section to you because it's just an absolute hoot. One possible explanation for the post-flood Nephilim is that sons of God, distinct from those who had sexual relations with the daughters of humans before the flood, did the same with daughters of humans born after the flood. If these sons of God were fallen angels, then these fallen angels are, in addition to the ones who were locked up in the abyss because of their having sexual relations with human females before the flood. Thus, the abyss would contain two sets of fallen angels, those who had violated human women before the flood and those who had violated human women after the flood. If the sons of God were human males, then this interpretation would imply that God had commanded the sons of Shem and Japheth not to have sexual relations with the daughters of Ham and Canaan. The violation of this command evidently would have produced a second generation of Nephilim. And if you find that terribly illuminating, it's not any noticeably less incoherent and silly than what you get from young Earth creationists on Nephilim, which we will be taking note of in Rocks for Their Volume 2. So all of this stuff I'm going to have to insert in various spots as yet a new wrinkle of why Reasons to Believe is occupying a strange little niche of a cartoon of a cartoon. I mean, he's not even as detailed as the structure of young Earth creationism is. At least Answers in Genesis' Ark Encounter has got a list of their kinds. It's not easy to get tidied up. It's not easy to track it down, but at least they got one. But you could have thought that he could have stuck a little bit more information into this cute little pamphlet. And by the way, even the Ark picture on the front with its little glowing windows in there, actually, the Ark Encounter at least is trying to kind of follow what they can of the original text to suggest there was one window and one door and not a bunch of these little light bits in there. But maybe it was electric. Oh, yes, and gopher wood. Yes. He goes on about gopher wood. He announces with complete lack of documentation, additionally, gopher wood likely had a tensile strength much superior to oak, and cites U. Ross Navigating Genesis, pages 174 to 175. Given the fact that nobody can identify what gopher wood is other than maybe a reference to some kind of cypress, any speculation about its tensile strength is pure speculative fiction, entirely for the needs of having the ark make sense. So although the one saving grace of this pamphlet compared to the volumes of material disgorged from Answers in Genesis, that at least it's only like 11 pages long. It's relatively short. So that was kind of a peculiar little essence because normally old Earth creationists don't weigh in much on the flood other than to treat it as like a metaphorical thing. So the attempt to salvage the literalism in a non-literally literal way, I'll give him A for effort and an F for misplaced concreteness, to borrow Whitehead's old phrase. So there we got about 15 minutes in. The situation has been dicey up and down on getting online because some of the interconnection is a little bit iffy. But we'll go with that. 15-minute things. I'll be sticking, of course, all the technical literature and the papers on, and it's kind of it's been a little hot here in Spokane. We're supposedly diving back below the high 80s into like 70s and 60s over the next few days, and so that'll be something to look forward to, and some potential thunderstorms and a few other possibilities. So we'll see how all that works out. Not as dicey as some areas, and we have been getting also some smoke that's been affecting our air quality here from coming down from the fires in Canada. So ain't 21st century fun? Well, I remind everyone not to accept any wooden penguins. And we'll see you all next week. And we'll have at least another 15 minutes of an evolution hour in, internet willing. Okay.